They called it Black Friday. A day when the morning sun rose over France not in light, but in shadow. When faith turned into fear, loyalty into treason, and the most powerful brotherhood of Christendom vanished into smoke and silence. But to understand that day, Friday, the 13th of October, 1307, we must go back 1,000 years earlier, to the deserts of the Holy Land. To a temple that was said to hold the very presence of God. The Temple of Solomon. A place where heaven and earth once met. Where the Ark of the Covenant was said to rest beneath golden cherubim. Its destruction in 586 BCE left behind more than ruins, it left behind a wound in the human soul. A void that would haunt empires and faiths for centuries to come. Generations later, that same longing to reclaim what was lost, to rebuild what had fallen, would ignite the Crusades. Europe's kings called it divine destiny. But behind every crusade there is always a hunger for power, for land, for immortality. When the first Crusaders stormed Jerusalem in 1099, they painted its streets red with blood, Christian, Muslim, and Jew alike. But in the aftermath of conquest, among the chaos of relics and ruins, a small group of knights began to ask a different question. What if the true treasure of Jerusalem was never gold, but knowledge? 9 knights. Led by Hugues de Payens. They swore a vow before the Patriarch of Jerusalem: poverty, chastity, obedience. They called themselves the poor fellow soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon. But history would remember them by a simpler name, the Knights Templar. For 9 years they dug beneath the Temple Mount. 9 years of secrecy. The chronicles say they were guarding pilgrims, but pilgrims to where? Others whispered that they were searching for something buried long before Christ walked the earth. Something ancient. Something forbidden. When they emerged, their fortunes changed overnight. The poor Knights of Christ became the wealthiest brotherhood in the medieval world. Kings owed them gold. Popes owed them power. They built fortresses across Europe and the Levant, each one a mirror of the temple itself. A geometry of faith and precision, every angle a prayer in stone. Yet their symbols spoke a different language. The cross-patee, the equal-armed seal of balance. The 2 riders upon one horse, a code of duality. And the 8-pointed star. A remnant, perhaps, of something older than the church itself. They invented modern banking, the concept of checks, the first international network of trust. A pilgrim could deposit his coin in London and withdraw it in Jerusalem. A miracle of paper and seal, protected by the sword of faith. But wealth breeds suspicion, and secrecy breeds fear. In a world ruled by superstition, power without explanation is heresy. As their influence spread, so did the stories. Some said the Templars worshipped a mysterious head called Baphomet. Others claimed they guarded the Holy Grail, or the bloodline of Christ himself. But truth, as always, was more dangerous than myth. For truth threatened the throne. By the early 14th century, Europe had changed. The Crusader kingdoms had fallen, the Holy Land was lost. And in France sat a king who owed his fortune to the Templars. Philip IV, Philip the Fair. He was a man of ambition cloaked in piety. And his treasury was bleeding. The Templars had become a kingdom within kingdoms, untouchable, loyal only to the Pope. And so Philip plotted not with swords, but with silence. In secret letters sealed with royal wax. He ordered the arrest of every Templar in France. At dawn, on Friday the 13th of October, 1307. The bells of Paris tolled not for prayer, but for betrayal. Knights were dragged from their beds, shackled in chains. Accused of spitting on the cross, denying Christ, worshipping idols. Under torture, confessions flowed like blood. Truth twisted by fire, names signed with screams. The order that had once defended Jerusalem now stood accused of heresy, witchcraft, and sodomy. The Pope, Clement V, a man caught between faith and fear. First hesitated, then capitulated. The Templars were dissolved by papal decree, their lands seized, their secrets buried. Yet one man refused to bow: Jacques de Molay, the last Grand Master. For 7 long years he was imprisoned, tortured, humiliated. And when the day came, he was led to the Isle de la Cite, the heart of Paris, to face the flames. Witnesses said he stood proud. his voice rising above the crackling fire. He denied the lies, forgave his enemies, and called down a curse. That both the Pope and the King would stand before God's judgment within the year. And so it was. Within months, both men were dead. The line of Philip the Fair ended in tragedy. His dynasty extinguished in whispers and war. The world called it coincidence. The faithful called it divine justice. The initiated called it prophecy. But what of the Templar treasure? What of the knowledge unearthed beneath the Temple Mount? It vanished like smoke into legend. Yet from the ashes of persecution, a shadow began to move across Europe. Survivors fled to Portugal, to Scotland, to the mountains of Switzerland. In Portugal, King Denis renamed them the Order of Christ. In Scotland, they found sanctuary beneath the banner of Robert the Bruce. Fighting in secret at Bannockburn, where the English saw a miracle, knights in white mantles appearing through the mist. By the 15th century, whispers of the Templar lineage resurfaced. In lodges, guilds, and stonemason brotherhoods. Craftsmen who built cathedrals carried not only stone but symbols. The compass and square, the all-seeing eye. The same geometry once carved into the stones of the Temple Mount. Thus was born another order. Not of swords and shields, but of knowledge and secrecy, Freemasonry. They spoke not of Jerusalem, but of the temple of the mind. The light they sought was no longer divine fire but enlightenment. The flame of reason. Yet the pattern was the same. A brotherhood beyond kings and nations. Bound by oaths, guided by symbols. Guarding truths the church could not bear to face. Centuries passed. Empires rose and fell. The names changed. But the architecture of secrecy remained. Freemasons built cathedrals of reason. Templars had built cathedrals of faith. Both reached toward heaven. And both concealed the same design. The human yearning for immortality through order. In the New World, their legacy took new shape. Washington, D.C., designed in sacred geometry. The all-seeing eye atop the unfinished pyramid on the dollar bill. The motto, Annuit Coeptis, he favors our undertakings. Coincidence? Or continuation? History never answers, it only echoes. The Templars may have died in the flames. But their symbols endure, carved into stone. Etched into architecture. Whispered in the rituals of men who still wear aprons and bear compasses. And somewhere, perhaps deep beneath Jerusalem, in a chamber untouched by time, lies what they sought. The secret that burned kingdoms and birthed empires. Not gold. Not blood. But the knowledge that faith, power, and truth are three faces of the same mystery. And that whoever unites them, rules not a nation, but the human soul. The fire had consumed them. The great banners of red and white once proud across the fields of Jerusalem had been reduced to whispers. In 1314, when Jacques de Molay, the last Grand Master of the Knights Templar, stood before the flames on the Isle de la Cite, he was not just dying, he was transforming. For as the flesh turned to ash, legend began to breathe. The medieval world that burned him believed the story was over, that the church had crushed a dangerous order of wealth and secrets. But stories like this don't die. They sink into the cracks of history, and wait. Low drums. A page turns. The Renaissance dawns. In Italy, centuries later, light returned to Europe, the light of knowledge, geometry, philosophy. The ruins of Greece were rediscovered, the works of Plato and Hermes Trismegistus reinterpreted through Christian eyes. Artists painted angels with human faces. Architects built cathedrals that rose like prayers carved in stone. But hidden within the cathedral's geometry were whispers, proportions and symbols that echoed the mysteries once guarded by warrior monks. It was as if, in the very mathematics of beauty, the memory of the Templars had found sanctuary. In Florence and Venice, scholars began speaking of divine proportion, of sacred architecture, of a world ordered not by dogma, but by design, a divine logic woven into nature itself. Here, philosophy and faith touched hands again, not in battle, but in curiosity. And in that meeting, something older stirred. Music shifts, a deep choral hum, like the opening of a secret vault. Across Europe, the guilds of stonemasons, humble builders of cathedrals, carried with them ancient codes. Their craft demanded precision, secrecy, and unity. They used symbols to teach: the compass, the square, the all-seeing eye of geometry. When the cathedrals stopped rising, the guilds faced extinction. But then, the masons of stone became masons of thought. They opened their lodges to men of letters, of science, of reason, men who sought light not from Rome, but from within. And so was born a new brotherhood, Freemasonry. No longer knights, but philosophers. No longer bound by crusade, but by curiosity. They gathered in candlelit halls, wearing aprons instead of armor, but the spirit was strangely familiar: the pursuit of truth beyond dogma, the idea of a sacred order hidden beneath the chaos of the world. Music swells, violins rising like dawn over marble columns. In their rituals, echoes of the Templar myth reappeared: the lost word, the hidden temple, the brotherhood of builders. And whether these symbols were borrowed or reborn, they carried power. For in an age when kings ruled by divine right, and the church still whispered of damnation, Freemasonry spoke of equality, reason, and liberty, ideas that could shake thrones. And shake them it did. The Enlightenment, a storm of light, swept through Europe. Philosophers like Voltaire and Diderot gathered in salons, discussing the rights of man, the nature of truth, and the architecture of society itself. It was no longer about building cathedrals of stone, but of justice. It was an age when reason became a kind of faith. And across the sea, a new world was being built. In the late 18th century, on the shores of America, the dream of the Enlightenment took root in the soil of rebellion. The founding fathers Washington, Franklin, Jefferson, men shaped by reason and fraternity, carried with them symbols drawn from the Masonic lexicon: the compass, the pyramid, the eye. These were not marks of a secret empire, but of a shared belief that the world could be designed anew. And yet, every new design carries its shadows. For the same ideals that inspired liberty also whispered of control. The same geometry that built freedom's temple could also build systems of hierarchy, secrecy, and power. Humanity, once again, stood between light and darkness, holding tools that could shape both. Kings accused them of conspiracy. Popes condemned them as heresy. And through it all, the myth of the Templars resurfaced, now no longer as warriors, but as archetypes of resistance against tyranny. Poets and painters romanticized them. Philosophers reinterpreted them. Even in silence, their story kept evolving, from relic to metaphor. The Templars became a mirror through which every generation saw its struggle: faith versus reason, obedience versus freedom, secrecy versus truth. Cinematic crescendo, choirs, strings, distant thunder. And so, from the ashes of the medieval pyre to the marble halls of the Enlightenment, one thread runs unbroken: the belief that hidden knowledge can set humanity free. Not secret power, but secret wisdom. Not domination, but understanding. For every age needs its keepers of light. Some call them builders. Some call them dreamers. And some, still, call them Templars. Soft wind. The camera rises through clouds over a glowing city at night, modern skylines echoing cathedral spires. Look closely at the architecture of our world, at the symbols carved into its currencies, its capitals, its monuments. They are not marks of control, but of continuity. A language older than empire, older than nation, the geometry of belief itself. We may never know whether the spirit of the Templars truly survived through the Masons and philosophers who came after them. But perhaps survival was never the point. Perhaps the Templars' real legacy was not a treasure buried beneath a chapel, but an idea that truth, once ignited, can never be extinguished. Music fades, final narration soft and reflective. Every civilization leaves behind its ruins, some made of stone, others made of thought. And sometimes, those ruins are not endings, but beginnings, foundations for what comes next. The Templars may have fallen in fire, but the fire still burns.